First, I'm going to explain. This is not mine. This is a safety lamp. These were used in the pit to test gas. So this has been fetched by Alan, who's from Paul Kemmy. Give him a mention, he was on strike and he was sacked. And had trouble getting back to work. Before these, we used to use canaries. So, but yeah, these were much more effective and saved a lot of people's lives. So thanks for that, mate. I used to have one, but I don't know, somebody pinched it off me. Right, so here we go. So yeah, 40 years. I mean, it's a bit mad really when you think about it. 40 years. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I went back home. I did and attended a wonderful meeting organised by the local trades council to commemorate the strike, and there were some great speakers in attendance. Lots of people I've not seen for ages. The following day, I found myself in a museum, and there were a picture in the museum of me. I thought, Christ, I've ended up in a museum, but I don't think the strike should be seen as a relic. I mean, it's been really good that there's been so much discussion, so many documentaries and programmes. Some I'll recommend, some I won't. I mean, the one about Paul Mays, the first pit to fight, in village at Fort Back, which is on BBC Scotland. I highly recommend that as something. Less so the Channel 4 documentaries. But it's good that this is getting an airing. And I think also what I'm discovering, talking to old colleagues, is a sense of relief, because, you know, people feel that they never really got the story out about what the strike was about, the importance of the strike. Because to be honest, if that strike, you think about it for a start, right? So I was 26 years old. I was one of 180,000 people that decided to fight, not for pay, right, but for the right to work, that fought for the right to defend those communities. There's a saying, you kill a pit, you kill a community. If anybody recently has watched the excellent film The Old Oak by Ken Loach, right, that's what a lot of ex-mining communities look like. And it's actually, if you haven't watched it, it's very inspiring in terms of, you know, when you see how people become so demoralised, so depressed at what happened to them, that they start punching and lashing out at people, but also how people, a few individuals can pull things back together and get people to punch back up at the people that are really responsible for the deprivation and suffering that was created from the destruction of the mining industry and its communities. But it's part of the story. Yes, you know, Arthur Scarborough's, in my book, still one of the finest trade union leaders that we've actually seen, who led the National Union of Mine Workers. He has recently been doing meetings where he refuses to use the word defeat. Now, I've got some sympathy because, to be honest, but I disagree with him, because we were defeated. But by us being defeated, everybody was defeated. The political landscape and the industrial landscape was actually changed dramatically. And we still actually see it played out today, because yes, Margaret Thatcher was absolutely determined to beat the miners, and did beat the miners, but God's sake did we give her a fight and a run for her money. And inside that, some amazing and inspiring things was actually came about. So 180,000 people, very young, very militant. And when it came to it, we knew that this was going to come about. We knew that they had a plan. We knew that they wanted to get rid of the mining industry. Not because they particularly disliked miners, because they disliked unions. They disliked people and organisations that stood in the way of them making the profits and making British industry more competitive. Competitive for them meant people being chucked on the scrap heap. We knew that they're going to come for the NUM. They're going to go for the miners. They'd already started embarking on a plan that they devised in opposition, which was written by a guy called Nicholas Ridley, the Ridley Plan, which was basically a playbook to take on the National Union of Mine Workers. The Tories in the early 70s have been defeated by the working class, by the miners, twice, 1972 and 1974. And it weighed like a nightmare on the brain of the Tories. And Margaret Thatcher was determined to make sure that when she came into office, that she would basically not fall victim to what Edward Heath fell to. Edward Heath actually went to the election. He actually stood an election in 1974. You either vote for us or you vote for the miners. People voted for the miners and introduced a Labour government that unfortunately also tried to tackle what they saw as industrial problems, i.e. union militancy. They created the demoralisation that led to Margaret Thatcher becoming into power. So when the strike came about, obviously there's other arguments that have come out that you might hear. I don't want to get bogged down with them, but one of the things that needs explaining is in terms of this argument about a national ballot, right? That basically the miners should have, if the miners had had a national ballot, then they would have been more united. Well, if we'd have had a national ballot, first of all, we would have probably lost. But the argument about that is false, because we were out on strike. Pickets in Scotland came out on strike. We came out on strike in Yorkshire, and basically we set up picket lines. Picket lines, which we said we asked people not to cross the picket lines, we asked the people to stand and fight back against the Tories. As far as we're concerned, the fight was on. And boy, what a fight it was. Because over that 12 months, they used every trick in the book to try and beat us. Now, I look back and I wonder how we actually stood it for 12 months, right? It wasn't just, Thatcher, everything was raised against us. The media pillared us. They called us the scum of the earth. They lied and deceived people about the cause. No miners were allowed really to go and put the case forward through the media. Arthur Scargill was demonised. They had the spooks who were infiltrating us, listening on us, all part of the smear campaign, and part of the Ridley plan was the national mobilisation of the police force. And the police in the miners' strike were brutal. They were absolutely brutal. They were used as a wedge in Nottinghamshire first, and then later on in the strike, they invaded and occupied mining communities. Thousands of people were arrested. In fact, nearly 10,000 people were arrested. 8,000 people were charged, including myself. The 2 miners died on the picket lines. 5 people died picking coal. In terms of trying to eat their homes. So in terms of the full force of the state, the media, everything were raged against us. So obviously in that situation you expect, when I talk about a loss, and a loss for everybody, in that situation then you look for friends. And you would expect the trade union movement, if it's an attack on the trade union movement, that the trade union movement to rally. Now, rank and file members of the unions did rally. The support and solidarity that came out of that strike, there's no way we could have lasted for 12 months. I don't think I've even mentioned yet that we didn't get any money during the strike. We didn't have strike pay. You got £1 if you went picketing, right? So you were on strike for 12 months, no money. Also part of the Ridley plan was to cut social security for strikers. So there were no money coming into people's homes. The only benefit that wasn't stopped was child benefit. Everything else was gone, right? So people had mortgages, people had rents, people had debts to pay, right? They could not pay those debts, right? So that was causing a lot of hardship. So in terms of the solidarity campaign that came about, they were absolutely vital for keeping us going. And there were situations also in the strike when we could have won that strike very easily. We nearly won it. I mean, it's all come out now that, you know, if it had gone on for a bit longer, that there would have been power cuts in the country. Thatcher would have had to sue for peace. She would have to go to the table. It was, like I said, it was a close run thing. But in terms of the other factor that was against us was, like I said, the TUC, the trade union leaders. There was some fantastic solidarity. Organic coal moved by rail, right? So coal from power stations, from pickets to power stations, it was stopped, right? They had to basically mobilise, and again part of the Ridley plan, a large-scale operation using lorries by mobilising the coal around the country, right? So they stockpiled coal, but at the same time they were burning oil, which were costing billions as well. They reckon it cost, in today's money, it's more than 37 billion that they spent on trying to defeat the strike. So, you know, no money for the health service, no money for education, you know, money for war, money to beat trade unions, always plenty. Pockets are deep, and that's how determined they were. Nigel Lawson coined it in a phrase saying, organising to beat the miners was like preparing for to rearm against a fight against Hitler. Thatcher described the miners as the enemy within. She said that the Falklands War, they fought the enemy without, the miners were the enemy within. So it was absolutely crucial that people came to us help. So when I go back to 1972 and 74, there were two victories. 1984 went down to defeat. 84 we had what was seen as a left-wing leadership. There were strengths and weaknesses with this. In terms of Scargill was in step with most of the young militants, including myself, the thousands of youngsters out on the strike. Arthur Scargill couldn't do anything wrong. Arthur Scargill talked about spreading the strike, spread the strike. Arthur Scargill talked about building solidarity amongst other workers. We attempted to do that. But also Arthur Scargill relied on people within his union who also had a different agenda, who didn't believe that militant action was a way to win the strike. And that hamstrung Arthur Scargill, but also hamstrung the rank and file. Also, the rank and file, although there was massive enthusiasm amongst young miners in the strike for the fight, for the strike, people didn't have the same traditions that you saw in the early 72, 74. I mean, Orgreave, everybody heard about Orgreave. Orgreave was brutal. Orgreave was not one day. I mean, Orgreave is 3 miles from the pit I worked at. We were there from May into June, the famous day on the 18th of June when the police rioted and tried to make a statement to make sure that we didn't come back. In 1972, there was a similar situation at Saltley Gates in Birmingham, which was also a coking plant. At Orgreave, there was over 5,000 or 6,000 miners, maybe 8,000 coppers. At Saltley Gates, there was 400 or 500 miners. The difference were they had 10, 15,000, 20,000 engineering workers with them and steel workers. Engineering factories, car plants, and basically didn't ask them politely, demanded that they come down. It basically said, this fight is your fight. We have to shut the gates. We have to shut the gates at Saltley. And that's what happened. And there's a famous picture of the banners marching, the engineers and other workers marching down with the Yorkshire miners down to Saltley Gates and shutting the plant down. The police had to shut the gates that day. They'd lost it. At Orgreave, we didn't manage that. They were more determined. With the Thatcher leadership, the police, they were much more determined to keep the place open. A couple of times during it, I'm not going to go on about it, a couple of times we caused mayhem, and we did nearly shut it, but it was kept open. And that day when they beat us brutally, right, where 95 people were arrested, half of them were put on charges of riotous behaviour. All the charges, by the way, were dropped later, because all the coppers sang the same song, because they were told what to write in the books, and the evidence were laughed out of court, which were a big victory for those guys. In terms of what we didn't do the following day, we were told not to go back again, right? And that is a tragedy, because it was proven again, support and solidarity for the miners went up after Orgreave. Because despite the BBC doctoring with the images, showing basically the police responding to so-called bricks and bottles being thrown at them, the footage was, they admitted later, far too late, that they actually turned the footage round, right? That it was actually that we were trying to defend ourselves against riot police on horseback who just wanted to bray you, right? You had to run for your frigging lives, you know. It was, I've been to Genoa, right? Genoa came close. So Genoa was a bit more scary because the coppers that were chasing you in Genoa had guns. But these bastards wanted to bray you. I mean, a friend of mine, Arthur Critchlow, he's on one of the Channel 4 programmes. So this day he's still badly affected by that in terms of his mental and physical health. He were a few yards behind me, and when we got to a safe place, he wasn't with us. And unbeknown to us, they got him. They battered him, right? They stuck him in a police cell, right, for 2 or 3 days, giving him no treatment whatsoever. So we could have gone round factories in Sheffield. I don't want to reel the battles here. We could have gone round. We wanted to do that, and we were told you can't do that. And after Orgreave, the Tories then went on the offensive in terms of trying to push us back. It became a war of attrition. However, she nearly blew it a couple more times. First of all, these were carried by deputies in the pit. Deputies in the pit were foremen. They nearly came out and strike. They voted to come out and strike. If they came out and strike, they looked after safety in the pits, right? Nottinghamshire would have had to shut down because no deputies. The deputies in Nottinghamshire voted to come out and strike. That would have been it. Game over. Now, I don't know about Alan here, but I never had much faith that they would do much because they were the foremen at the end of the day. We didn't have much trust in them. And when they called the strike off, you felt, oh, that's a shame, but you know. What was even more disappointed is when the dock workers went out on strike. Twice they went out on strike. The first time they went on strike, the Tories and the ruling class in this country were panicking. They were panicking because it wasn't just coal. They might not be able to get into the country. They couldn't get food into the country, right? That's when they did have a serious discussion, and it's come out in later years in cabinet papers about having to mobilise the army to distribute supplies to feed people, basics, all the rest of it. And the dock workers came out on strike because coal was moved by scab labour at Immingham docks in Lincolnshire, and that coal was going to be used at Scunthorpe, at the steelworks, right? When scab labour was sent in to unload it, the dockers walked out en masse, not just in Immingham, but nationally. It became a national dock strike. They were terrified. Unfortunately, the leader of the dock workers cobbled the deal together. It was assured, the union executive was assured that the dock labour scheme, which was a scheme to protect the rights of dockers everywhere, right, that basically that scheme would be protected. And they believed them. You know, 5 years later, the dock labour scheme was under attack, and it was scrapped, right? So that was again another missed opportunity. In the meantime, there was talks going off. Those talks were sabotaged. As soon as the dockers went back to work, those talks were sabotaged. Ian McGregor who was a Thatcherite cader, right, head of the British Steel Corporation, he basically, that's it, game up. And that's when we saw the invasion of the mining communities. In pits like mine, 21st of August, we had one person went back to work, right? To get that one person back to work, there was thousands of coppers, right? And again, the police rioted. They rioted in my community. And you saw that repeated throughout, from August into autumn, and then it was a war of attrition that took us right up to Christmas and beyond. And now what I want to say is, how could you stand all that? That's when the solidarity from individuals really played, and that's where it's important to remind yourself of the inspiring stuff. At the outset of the strike, Margaret Thatcher thought she had a secret weapon. It was called the women. She thought that the women would turn on the men, that they would suffer hardship, that they would want to pay keep the mortgages and all the nice things like, you know, I don't know, I mean, I don't know so great about an Uber and all the rest of it, right? But, you know, I think people think bigger than that, Margaret, you know, so it backfired. I mean, there were a few women stuck on BBC, oh, this is terrible, blah, 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 blah. But the women in the communities knew what were happening here. This was their fight as much as the guys' fight, right? So they started to organise themselves into the women's support, what they call the women's support groups. At Silver, we call the Witcher, the women's action group, because they didn't want to just be seen as supporting, they wanted action, right? Those women did organise the soup kitchens where we could get fed, and it was decent grub, unless you got a tin of Russian turkey, or from frogs' legs from France, you know. But you were that hungry, you'd eat anything, you'd eat a scabby donkey, you know. So the women, in getting involved in the strike, a number of things happened. It changed their consciousness. They saw themselves more than just homemakers and child raisers, right? They become politicised, but also the challenge of men. You know, in terms of the mining industry, it's all men. Now, it's only all men because it's in legislation. Women work around the world, in terms of America, women work down coal mines, right? It was just because it was in legislation that no women worked down the pits. Women started to get involved in the picket line. They started speaking. And there's a marvellous rally took place in Barnsley with 10,000 women, right? Powerful. You know, so, and it changed a lot of those women, like the men, it changed their outlook of how they looked at the world. Similarly, when people were going out into cities, right, to try and collect money and raise support, right, they noticed that a lot of Asian and black people were very generous in the support, and they find out, they were sharing stories about police brutality. You know, people in Toxteth, people in Birmingham, people in London, Sheffield, black people were saying, police brutality, yeah, tell us about it, you know. It's like the people started to make comment. This challenged racism in people's heads, right? So, and then, amazingly, again, all-male workforce, you're talking about, you know, I think there were one guy at Silverwood Pit who was gay, openly gay, right? 1,300 men, there's bound to be others. Steve knew them. That's how he protected himself. He used to say when he used to get teased, he used to say, if you keep it up, I'll start naming names. People used to shut up, right? Steve nearly went back to work, right? Myself and a comrade, Steve Hamill, went to see Steve. We sat down with Steve. This was probably November at the strike. He'd had the phone call. He'd had the letter. Where is it? He had that, earn it or lose it, you know, offering you money, throwing money at you to go back to work, right? So, me and Steve went and sat down with Steve, and we convinced him to get involved in the strike. We convinced him that people would see him as an equal if he got involved in the strike, and he did. And he was on the picket line day in, day out. And when we went back to work, there were people who weren't involved in the action, but they didn't go back to work, thought it was the same business as usual. People used to say, you weren't on the picket line, he fucking worked, right? So it challenged homophobia. And there's a marvellous film called Pride, which everybody should watch, about the links that were made between gay and lesbian people in London and the South Wales mining community. And it's an absolutely inspiration. And as an aside, sacked miners, there were people sacked during the strike. One of the ways we've raised funds with them was selling badges. You get some of them who walk around like they've got, like, you know, medals, you know, tons of these badges. And like, I tell you, one of the most popular badges was the wee pink triangle. Okay, I'll try some of them. So there's so much you could talk about. That, when Karl Marx talks about, you know, one of the things that keeps us down, the divide and rule, the muck of ages, right? When people struggle, and you saw this in the strike, so many people changed. It politicised them. When the establishment, the state, the media, everybody's against you, and then the people that are coming to support you are black, the brown, the women, the gays. It basically said, hold on a minute, and people started to learn other stuff, but not enough of us learned it quick enough, or we could have changed things. And that was the role of the trade union leadership. Going back to the trade union leadership, I'll just try and finish off on this. We did challenge them. I'm very proud, actually, that I've been dragging stuff around, which is things like this, right? This is an open letter, right? This was written by me and the late Steve Hamill, a very good friend of mine. And this were agitating to stop coal being moved into the steelworks. They were lying to us about the production levels. This kicked off a big argument that led to that coal, that we stopped that coal going to Scunthorpe Steelworks, right? That led to the mobilisation of the lorries, Orgreave, etc., right? This is what you guys are involved in Scotland, right? Because a similar situation was in Ravenscraig. And if you watch the documentary about Paul Mays, there's some scary footage in there, you know, in terms of like the lorries going through the picket lines at Unterson Power Station and places like this. What you do wonder how people didn't get killed. The SWP played an absolutely magnificent role. We've got in here tonight one of the journalists, one of the finest journalists who work for Socialist Worker, Maureen, right, who used to come up to the picket lines, who used to, people like Mike Simons, who's written this book, right, and it's been reprinted with a new foreword, which is magnificent, right. Every week they used to produce a paper, Socialist Worker, that said victory to the miners. On the back here is all the pages. Every week, it was about the miners. It was about supporting the miners. Why the miners fight was your fight. Why you had to get involved. And I'm proud to say at Silverwood Pit, we had his own wee bundle of papers that used to be sent up every Wednesday, put down on the picket line, and people, despite the poverty and the hardship people were suffering, people still paid 10p or 5p for the paper as a mark of respect for what the paper was saying. I joined the party during the miners' strike in April. I was a fellow traveller for a couple of years, partly because my mate Steve were like, you know, always arguing with him, but you know, he would never really convince me. What convinced me was the strike in terms of the role that the party was playing in the strike. So if we'd have started at the end of the strike, if we'd have had, I don't know, a couple of hundred people, right, inside the union who were meeting, talking strategically, saying, okay, if Jack Taylor of the NUM and Mick Maguire of the Scottish NUM are not going to bloody do this, right, then we're going to agitate for it, just like Scarborough did in the early 1970s, and Mick Maguire did. I don't think Jack Taylor ever did. His nickname was Yorkshire Pudding anyway. He weren't much good at anything really. If we'd have had that type of, and then if you'd have had a network of socialists, militants around socialist newspapers, in other industries, in the power stations, in the steelworks, in the engineering plants. They would have been mobilised and said, it's great all this money, right? You know, it's great sending all this money to feed people, you know, all the rest of it. But for God's sake, what we need to do is get the lights out. We need to stop steal. We need to deliver the solidarity that they talk about at the trade union at the top, but they never deliver because they're working with people like Neil Kinnock, right? A man who sat on the fence, he had so many splinters in his arse. He sat on the fence that much, right? The leader of the Labour Party at the time. They were just desperate to get us back to work. They were the ballots. They were the get a ballot, do this, stop the violence, right? They're always, you know, they're always wrong, actually. We could have undermined them if we'd have had that network, of socialists, right? Around, I would argue, socialist worker and wider, to mobilise the type of support that would have bring around a victory that would have, you think about what that would have meant today, you would have had end of Margaret Thatcher, you would have had something better than Tony Blair, and then you think about what these people have done, you know, not just in terms of, you know, the economic situation, but the foreign policy. How many people died in Iraq? How many people died in Iraq, right? You know, this is Tony Blair, right, sending people there to fight people, you know. You think about the deprivation, the food banks. There's more bloody food banks than bloody McDonald's, you know. It's like, it's better food though, but it's scandalous what's happening at the moment. So it's great to see people fighting back, people still wanting to know how we can achieve that, and I think that's why it's important to look back at the strike. It was a defeat, yes, but there was so much we can learn from it to go forward and bring about that situation where we win completely.